Shadow, wood, sword, thunder, power, sleep. Cardcaptors of the cloud, expect the unexpected now.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. Lately, we've been exploring some of the craze about adapting Japanese anime for Western audiences back in the 90s and early 2000s. As we all know, some made it through with just a few cuts, while others were butchered beyond recognition, and some were a little bit of both. One of the anime series that was heavily reworked for North American audiences was Cardcaptor Sakura. It was renamed, reordered, rewritten, and a good chunk of its personality was surgically removed, and most of us who grew up with it never even realized what had happened. I mean, we were oblivious kids, it wasn't our fault. Anyways, today we're looking at just that, one of the most heavily altered anime localizations of the early 2000s, and just how far the American broadcast version drifted from the Japanese original it was supposedly adapting. It's going to be a fascinating ride, so let's get right into it.
Cardcaptors, a mystic adventure. Cardcaptors, a quest for all time.
If you grew up in the United States in the early 2000s, you might remember Cardcaptors a certain way. It was a punchy adventure cartoon with an aggressive theme song, an arrogant boy called Lee turning up to challenge the heroine, and a lot of shouting about capturing cards before they inevitably caused chaos. Sakura and her friends felt more like action cartoon kids, confident, sarcastic, and forever in the middle of a battle. The show seemingly started out of nowhere and dropped viewers straight into the rivalry, and those of us who watched it just went along with it because the monsters looked cool. But that's not how it originally started. In Japan, the show isn't called Cardcaptors at all. It's called Cardcaptor Sakura, a 70-episode anime produced by Madhouse and based on a shoujo manga by the all-female creator group Clamp. It's gentle, romantic, comedic, and filled with slice-of-life storytelling alongside its magical card adventures. Sakura Kinomoto is a sweet, slightly naive young girl whose greatest strengths are love, kindness, and determination rather than aggression, and the show is filled with tender romantic subplots. Gay, straight, requited, unrequited, and everything in between, along with some more controversial ones that were originally treated as important parts of the story. The two versions aren't completely unrecognizable. They use the same animation, central cast, and core premise, but between the title, episode order, personalities, rewritten romances, and even the emotional stakes of the finale, you end up with two remarkably different versions of the same show. We're going to be breaking down the biggest differences between Japan's original Cardcaptor Sakura and America's Cardcaptors, from the butchered episode order to the quiet deletion of nearly every love story in the show. Ready? Let's get into it. From Cardcaptor Sakura to Cardcaptors, the title that kicked it all off. Let's start with the names because they tell you almost everything. The original centers on a young girl. Her name's right there in the title, front and center, and it was published and marketed primarily towards young Japanese girls. When Nelvana adapted it for English-speaking markets, it removed Sakura's name and simply called it Cardcaptors, creating a more gender-neutral title that could market both Sakura and Sioren as something closer to co-leads. It doesn't sound like much, I know, it's just one missing word from a two-word title, but it matters. Dropping Sakura from the title is the first domino that falls, laying the groundwork for many of the other changes that would occur next. The moment the localization stopped presenting the series purely as Sakura's story and began emphasizing a broader card battling adventure, the remaining changes became much easier to justify. Genre swap. Shoujo romance becomes a more action-oriented adventure. This is kind of the root cause of everything else that changed between the two versions. Japanese manga and anime are often categorized according to their target demographics, and the two most familiar terms are shoujo, aimed primarily at girls, and shonen, aimed primarily at boys. The original Cardcaptor Sakura is a shoujo magical girl story filled with cuteness, costume changes, young romance, everyday school life, and card capturing adventures. The cards are still central to the plot, so it would be misleading to say that they're merely background decoration. However, the emotional relationships and Sakura's personal growth receive just as much attention as the magical battles. The North American broadcast was deliberately refocused to be more action-oriented and more appealing to male viewers, who broadcasters considered an especially important audience for animated programming. The same footage was repackaged as a faster Monster of the Week adventure, closer to the card collecting and battling programs that were popular around the turn of the millennium. The editing, reordered episodes, new soundtrack, and rewritten dialogue all contributed to this shift. Nothing about the original animation was fundamentally changed, but the way it was presented changed dramatically. And once you decide that a romantic coming-of-age story is now primarily an action-adventure show, you have to tone down the romance. And there's plenty of that in the original, which brings us to most of the rest of this video. The Japanese setting became a vaguely westernized one. We wouldn't call this one a necessary change, but apparently the localizers thought it was important. Just translating the dialogue, like many early children's dubs, wasn't enough for this one. Much like the westernized Sailor Moon adaptation before it, Cardcaptors downplayed its Japanese setting to make the series feel less foreign. The town of Tomoeda, where most of the series takes place, was renamed Readington. It goes deeper than just location names, though. Cultural references and landmarks were renamed or made more generic, so Tokyo Tower became the Radio Tower. The dub didn't always clearly declare that the story took place in the United States, but it removed or rewrote enough Japanese details to leave the location deliberately vague and sort of westernized. It's kind of funny, like a strange sort of magic trick, insisting that a show visibly and unmistakably set in Japan is happening in some undefined western town, and hoping nobody notices the cherry blossoms, school uniforms, shrine visits, or Japanese writing on signs. To be fair, a lot of kids don't notice that stuff because analyzing the geography of a cartoon at 7 in the morning while eating cereal just isn't something they're there to do. But it is a perfect example of how the localization went to sand off anything that read as specifically Japanese while retaining almost all of the original Japanese visuals. Starting mid-story, the episode order gets scrambled. This is the one that gave a generation of American kids that nagging, "Wait, did I miss something?" feeling. Every 90s and 2000s kid knows exactly what that's like. The original runs for 70 episodes. Nelvana created English versions of all 70, and more complete versions of the dub aired in places like Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom. However, the version broadcast on Kids WB in the United States was cut down to 39 episodes, with many installments omitted and the remaining episodes shown in an altered order. And the choice of opening episode is The Tell. The first episode to air in the US was Sakura's Rival, the 8th episode of the original series, with the earlier Sakura-focused installments skipped so the program could open with the arrival of Shioran Lee. The secondary male lead was introduced immediately and was promoted as something closer to Sakura's equal co-protagonist. This left American viewers without much of the original setup, including Sakura releasing the cards, meeting Kero, capturing her first cards, and establishing her friendship with Tomoyo. Characters could refer to earlier events that the audience had never seen, making the story feel as though viewers had entered halfway through. The full Nelvana dub existed, but the aggressively shortened and reordered Kids WB edition became the version most closely associated with Cardcaptors in the United States. A later Animax English dub also presented all 70 episodes with the original order, music, and a script much closer to the Japanese version. The cards themselves sparked an occult panic. Here's a difference that's less about the program itself and more about what happened around it. The Clow cards in Japan are exactly what the show presents them as. A whimsical deck of magical spirit cards with elemental powers created by the sorcerer Clow Reed. They were magical artifacts in an animated fantasy, and there was nothing inherently sinister about them. In the United States, though, the deck attracted complaints from the American Family Association, a conservative Christian organization that argued that the cards looked too much like tarot cards and that the series drew upon occult practices and Eastern mythology. This came to public attention during Taco Bell's January 2002 Cardcaptors promotion, which included 4 toys connected to the series. The American Family Association objected to the promotion, but its complaints reportedly began only shortly before the promotion was already scheduled to end. There's no reliable evidence that Taco Bell withdrew half the toys because of this controversy, and it remains unclear whether the complaint had any practical effect at all. Just think of how far that is from the original intent. Clamp created a soft, flower-filled fantasy about a girl and her magical card deck, and the moment it crossed the Pacific, some people treated it as a gateway to the occult. Almost everyone gets a westernized name. As I said before, it's not just the place names. Most of the cast was rechristened for the Western audience. Some names became anglicized versions of the originals, while others were changed completely. Sakura Kinomoto became Sakura Avalon. Her best friend, Tomoyo Daidoji, became Madison Taylor. Her older brother, Tuya, became Tori Avalon, while Yukito Tsukihiro became Julian Starr. Shioren Lee's name was presented as Lee Shouron, while Mei-ling Lee became Mei-lin Rei. Sakura's father, Fujitaka, became Aiden Avalon, her late mother, Nadeshiko, became Natasha Avalon, and Tomoyo's mother, Sonomi, became Samantha Taylor. Sakura retained her given name, although the dub changed its pronunciation. Kero, Yue, Ruby, Moon, and Clow Reed were among the relatively few names that remained largely intact. And one clarification, Kero's complete name was already Keroberos in the Japanese version, a Japanese rendering of Cerberus, the watchdog of the Greek underworld. The dub didn't invent Keroberos, although different English translations have rendered the name as Keroberos, Kerberos, or even just simply Cerberus. None of these name changes altered the animation, but collectively, they did help detach the characters from their Japanese identities and contributed to the impression that Readington existed somewhere in the English-speaking West. Politeness was traded in for attitude. If you watch the two versions side by side, the tonal gap will hit you before the name changes or plot differences even come into play. The aesthetic of the original is soft, pastel, and gentle, and the interplay between the characters' school lives, friendships, family relationships, and magical adventures forms the texture of the series. The characters are often polite and emotionally restrained, even during high-stakes situations. But that's not how many Western action cartoons of the era sounded, so the dub cranked everyone up. Voices became louder, snappier, more sarcastic, and more exaggerated, molded to fit what broadcasters thought North American children expected cartoons to sound like. Even Sakura, who openly displays her nerves, kindness, and vulnerability in the original, comes across as tougher and more sarcastic in the Nelvana dub. The most obvious example, though, is Madison, Tomoyo's counterpart. The original Tomoyo is elegant, softly spoken, formal, and intensely devoted to Sakura. Madison is louder, chirpier, and frequently given a valley girl style of speech. It's not as huge a change as deleting an entire romance arc, especially since both versions preserve her devotion to Sakura, but it might be the most pervasive change because it affects almost every line of dialogue. It's not that the children in the American version were necessarily rude, they were simply turned up to 11 in a way that felt jarring compared to their personalities in the Japanese original. The theme song flip. Sweet pop to action cartoon rock. Censorship generally means taking things out, but the irony is that the American show also adds something that wasn't prominent in the original packaging, and that's aggression. The original Japanese series used several cheerful pop opening songs performed by female singers, accompanied by colorful imagery that emphasized Sakura, her costumes, school life, friendships, and magic. The American version replaced these with a new English theme performed by a male vocalist and recut the visuals to emphasize battles, danger, the cards, and Shioren alongside Sakura. Again, just think of how telling that is. Rather than softening the program, the localization injected more intensity into its presentation because the sweeter, more traditionally feminine elements were exactly what broadcasters wanted to minimize. Other English-language territories sometimes used translated or adapted versions of the Japanese music, but the Kids WB edition used the newly created Cardcaptors of the Clow opening. The theme is probably the single loudest, literally, indicator of what American broadcasters wanted Cardcaptors to be.
キャンディーを握りしめつつうっとりなさってるんですもの。
Tomoyo's crush on Sakura was deleted. Listen, we could write a whole essay on Tomoyo's feelings for Sakura, because this part of the story was treated differently across the manga, anime, and English dub. In Clamp's original manga, Tomoyo's romantic love for Sakura is explicit and acknowledged rather than being simply a fan interpretation. She tells Sakura that she loves her while recognizing that Sakura does not understand or return those feelings in the same romantic way. The Japanese anime doesn't completely remove this. Tomoyo still confesses that she loves Sakura, and the framing, dialogue, and her constant devotion make the romantic nature of her feelings apparent, even though the television adaptation places less emphasis on it than the manga does. The American dub finishes the job by rewriting the romantic implications as purely platonic. Tomoyo becomes Madison, and her devotion is presented as exaggerated enthusiasm for her best friend rather than unrequited romantic love. So the erosion is more accurately a two-stage process, a manga and Japanese anime where Tomoyo's love is acknowledged, followed by a dub that removes its romantic meaning. Madison's obsessive investment in Sakura's every move is still there on screen, but the emotional explanation behind it is gone. Tuya and Yukido's romance was erased. This is one of the most glaring examples of romantic erasure. In the original, Sakura's older brother Tuya and his close friend Yukido share a mutual affection that is eventually confirmed to be romantic. Yukido tells Sakura that Tuya is the person he loves most, while Tuya later gives up his magical power to Yue to prevent Yukido from disappearing. It's one of the most emotionally significant relationships in the series, and the sacrifice works because Tuya is giving up something essential to save the person he loves. The Nelvana dub strips away all the romantic meaning and reframes Tori and Julian as extremely close friends. The sacrifice still happens because it's too important to the plot to remove entirely, but much of the emotional context behind it is rewritten. The later Animax English dub was far more faithful overall, although viewers have noted some strange moments in which dialogue connected to same-sex attraction disappeared from the audio track. However, these issues were not identical to the systematic rewriting found throughout Cardcaptors. The American broadcast removes an entire queer relationship, and in doing so, leaves a visible emotional emptiness in scenes that were originally built around love.
Julian's always so nice to me. And he's so cute.
Sakura's crush on the older Yukido was heavily downplayed. Sakura's first crush is a major emotional arc in the original series. Long before her feelings for Shioren develop, she's smitten with Yukido, who's several years older and is also her brother Tuya's closest companion. This is Sakura's first experience with intense romantic and unrequited feelings, and the way she processes them and moves forward contributes to her growth. The dub doesn't remove the crush completely, but it does rewrite dialogue and omits episodes in ways that heavily reduce its importance. Sakura's excitement around Julian remains visible because it's present in the animation, but the adaptation often avoids directly describing it as romantic attraction. The result is a thinner version of Sakura's emotional growth. The manga and Japanese anime allow a growing child to experience an awkward, hopeless crush and mature beyond it. The dub repeatedly flinches away from the subject, robbing Sakura of a relatable and human arc. The love triangle nobody talks about. Honestly, I feel like even some fans of the original Japanese show may forget about this part, so it doesn't surprise me that the American dub removed it entirely. In the original, before Sakura and Shioren fall for each other, they have something awkward in common. Both are attracted to Yukido. Exactly how many people in this show are in love with Yukido anyways? Regardless, Shioren's early crush on the older boy is obvious in the original, and it makes the two rivals strangely paralleled. The story later explains that Shioren was partly drawn towards the enormous lunar magic inside Yukido because Yue is a being aligned with the moon. However, the attraction is still presented through the behavior and embarrassment of a genuine childhood crush rather than being treated as completely meaningless. Nobody in the original treats a boy becoming flustered around another boy as a moral crisis. Shioren himself is embarrassed by the intensity of his feelings, but not consumed by shame over Yukido's gender. The American version removes this and rewrites Lee's flustered reactions around Julian as intimidation, suspicion, or general nervousness. This shared infatuation is part of what connects Sakura and Shioren before either recognizes the feelings developing between them. Taking it out removes an entire layer of their early rivalry and eventual bond. The cousins' family history and romantic tension were sanitized. Right, so this part of the original family tree gets complicated. Sakura's late mother, Nadeshiko, and Tomoyo's mother, Sonami, were first cousins. Sonami carried deep, unrequited romantic feelings for Nadeshiko and continued to resent Fujitaka for marrying her. This means that Sakura and Tomoyo are second cousins as well as best friends. There's also a separate and controversial age gap relationship underneath it. Nadeshiko was 16 when she married Fujitaka, who had been one of her teachers. The original presents their relationship romantically, while many modern viewers understandably find the teacher-student dynamic uncomfortable. The Cardcaptors dub kept Sakura and Madison's family connection in some dialogue, but heavily sanitized the history around their mothers. Natasha and Aiden were rewritten as having met as fellow students rather than as a teacher and his teenage pupil. Samantha's hostility towards Aiden was changed from romantic jealousy and grief into resentment over feeling excluded after the couple got together. So, a queer, unrequited love and a controversial teacher-student marriage were collapsed into a more conventional high school friendship drama. It's efficient, if nothing else. The rest of the romances were swept up with the same broom. Yup, it's a pattern, and it's everywhere because the team behind the dub was very thorough. Mei Ling wasn't just Shioran's childhood friend in the original anime, she was his cousin and self-declared fiancé. The dub removed their family relationship and presented Mei Ling primarily as a childhood friend with a possessive crush. The classmate Rika's relationship with her teacher, Mr. Terada, was also altered. The manga went so far as to portray them as secretly engaged, while the Japanese anime toned it down to Rika having a serious crush that Terada appeared to recognize. The dub removed the romantic element almost completely. Tuya's former relationship with the student-teacher Kaho Mizuki was likewise downplayed or rewritten. And yeah, sorry to get sidetracked, but how many student-teacher relationships are there in this story? And it's not just the same sex or controversial pairings that were rewritten, though those take the brunt of the changes. Chiharu and Yamazaki, childhood friends who are effectively a young couple in the original, were rewritten to be cousins in the dub. Even the central heterosexual romance between Sakura and Shioren was heavily reduced. In the Japanese anime, Shioren confesses his love, Sakura eventually realizes she loves him back, and their relationship receives its conclusion in the second film. In the American TV version, the confession and much of their romantic development is entirely removed, leaving Lee's departure without the same emotional payoff. Not a single ship was safe. The apparent assumption was that boys were less interested in romance because it was considered girly. However, all this really succeeded in doing was ripping much of the emotional heart out of the program. The Final Judgment's stakes were rewritten. We wanted to save this one for last, not just because it focuses on the finale of the Cloudcard arc, but because this change completely sums up the philosophy behind the American version. In the original Final Judgment, the stakes of Sakura's last great test are brutal. If she fails, everyone connected to the Cloudcards will lose the feelings they have for the person they love most. It's an ending built entirely around the show's emotional bonds, many of them romantic, and it works because by that point we know exactly who everyone loves. We understand what it would cost them to have those feelings erased. Love, in Cardcaptor Sakura, is central to almost every major character arc, and the judgment threatens to destroy it. The Cardcaptors dub replaces this with a more general memory loss story. If Sakura fails, the people involved will forget the events connected to the Cloudcards rather than losing their love for the people who matter most. On a broad plot level, both consequences involve people losing something important. Emotionally, though, they're completely different. The climax has been disconnected from love and attached to a more generic threat. Plus, it's the logical endpoint of every other change we've discussed so far. Having spent the series removing or downplaying the romance, the dub arrives at a finale whose entire emotional threat depends upon those romances. Therefore, it replaces love with the one thing its rewritten story can still threaten: memory. And I mean, what else could better sum up the entire localization? Okay, let's put the two versions side by side one last time. In Japan, Cardcaptor Sakura is a tender, romance-filled shoujo anime about a young girl growing up and learning how to love and be loved alongside the people closest to her. Card catching remains essential to the adventure, but the cards also provide a framework through which Sakura's friendships, family relationships, courage, and romantic feelings can develop. Although the anime softens or changes some material from the manga, it's iconic because it treats complicated, layered, and frequently queer relationships as natural parts of its world. It treats children's emotions as something worth taking seriously. It's a beautiful coming-of-age story about a magical girl moving towards adolescence. In the United States, the Kids WB edition of Cardcaptors took that same footage and reframed it as a faster card battling adventure, renaming the cast, westernizing the locations, scrambling the episodes, cranking up the attitude, and deleting or downplaying nearly every romance along the way. It's one of the clearest case studies in how far localization would go in the early 2000s to reshape a girly anime into something broadcasters thought they could sell more easily to boys, at the cost of much of the original story's emotional heart. The dub wasn't worthless. For many viewers, it was a gateway into this world, and there's a genuine nostalgic charm to its hyper-energetic Monster of the Week presentation. But if you only ever watched Cardcaptors while growing up, going back to the original Japanese version can really feel like meeting a completely different show wearing the same characters' faces. I'm right there with you guys. It's genuinely hard not to wonder what else slipped away in translation. But that brings us to the end of our video, so which of these changes caught you the most off guard? Or maybe there were some you were okay with. Let us know down in the comments, but that's all we got for you today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so we know to make more content like this. But otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.